You know, I was going to talk about more about the implications of Joe Biden's vaccine mandate today, but how could I just skip over the 20th anniversary of 9/11? I mean, if you look back at what's happened over the past 20 years, we have seen a remarkable change in this country. Back in 2001, the United States was at the height of its power. It was far and away the sole world power. Nobody came close. The U.S.'s closest competitors were a couple of tin pots. Russia, a rump state of the old Soviet Union, and the what was left of Maoist China after the Great Leap Forward. Aside from those two states, pretty much every other country in the world was a U.S. puppet state, or at least a U.S. ally of one sort or another. That is, of course, except for a handful of exceptions, but very, very minor exceptions. One of them, of course, being Afghanistan, and that was quickly remedied after the September 11th attacks. Afghanistan was swiftly invaded, not for the purpose of rooting out Al Qaeda and trying to, eliminate or capture the people who were involved with 9/11, but rather to conduct a regime change operation and install a U.S. puppet regime, which of course collapsed as rapidly as it was instituted. Actually, more rapidly, because it took a couple of years for them to build that regime. This year, of course, almost 20 years later. Then, of course, there was the war in Iraq, which was loosely connected to 9/11 as far as justification goes. I know certainly when I was young, growing up, the perception was that the Iraq War had something to do with 9/11. Of course, now as an adult, I know that that's absolutely false. But that was what average Americans were led to believe. Oh, Saddam Hussein, he's got something to do with that Osama bin Laden guy, right? And we were always worried about, oh my gosh, what happens when Al Qaeda gets their hands on a weapon of mass destruction? They're gonna set off a dirty bomb or something like that. What if one guy driving through Washington D.C. in a van with a dirty bomb decided to detonate it, downtown? He could take out the Congress and the White House and everybody. These were the sorts of ridiculous fever dreams that we Americans were being spoon-fed back then. It's kind of hard to imagine now, but it was kind of an innocent time if you think about it. The kinds of lies we're being fed today are far more absurd. And that's not even mentioning the many lies surrounding 9/11, the event itself. I was just thinking about all the lies after 9/11, trying to use 9/11 as a justification for every item on the regime's wish list. But of course, that reminds me a lot of the current situation. The U.S., in a way, we've evolved past 9/11. We don't need it anymore because now we have the Wu flu, and now the regime can use the Wu flu to justify forcing Americans and other people, but mainly Americans, to do whatever they want. The war on terror, as I warned early on in Biden's administration, is coming home. If Joe was to pull out of Afghanistan, I don't think that he would end the terror war. I thought that he would just migrate it back here. And it's clear that that is the case. Now we used to have the Taliban that the U.S. was at war with. Now they're getting ready to declare or to wage war on the American Taliban or the Texas Taliban. They're going to wage war on the unvaccinated, who have been largely outlawed by executive fiat. I thought of something. I know I'm jumping around a lot here, but when I was watching sort of the aftermath of what's going on in Afghanistan and how the Pakistani ISI is moving in and communicating, with the Taliban, and Pakistan seems like, they're very comfortable with the Taliban. And that's because there's a history going back to the days of the Soviet Union when what became the Taliban was supported and trained by Pakistan and the fledgling ISI, which was essentially an offshoot of the CIA that was established with the help of the CIA. The CIA was instrumental in helping the ISI, build their infrastructure and to set up these camps to train the Mujahideen, who would become both Al Qaeda and the Taliban. And that's why the ISI, in Pakistan's relationship with the Taliban, is so strong, and they're very comfortable with them coming into power. These are guys who they've been working with for decades. But they're also people that the U.S. worked with decades ago. And remember, the same goes for Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda and the Taliban, of course, are different groups, but they both came out of that broader, primordial soup known as the Mujahideen. And those Al Qaeda training camps, I believe, according to, I think it's Eric Margulies, I think it was, a very old war reporter, those were being run by the CIA before 9/11, and it wasn't, all Al Qaeda guys, looking to attack Americans who were training there. It was largely Chinese Uyghurs who were going to, take the fight to communist China. So it seems like those training camps, which had been operating since the 70s, originally to fight the Soviet Union, had been retooled to fight the Chinese. And so the United States was very familiar with these jihadist training camps in Afghanistan. And so, I'm not someone who feels certain, to say that to narrow in on a really well-defined grand conspiracy behind 9/11. But you look at all the things like this, and you can tell there are so many missing pieces to the puzzle that it's impossible for us to have a full picture right now. We have no idea. People talk a lot about the involvement of Saudi Arabia, which I think is obviously something that should be explored more. I live in fairly close proximity to where a Saudi diplomat was living with Mohammed Atta. I've driven by where they lived my entire life. I've been very conscious of that, and so I've always, to me, the Saudis and 9/11, they go hand in hand in my mind. But the role of the ISI is something that has been not explored at all, and I think deserves a lot more attention, especially considering the ISI's, direct connection to the CIA. They are a branch of the CIA, essentially. It's not to say that the ISI takes direct commands from the CIA. No, I just mean that they are, they're built on that model. The same way that the CIA is kind of an offshoot of MI6. The American intelligence community was developed and built by the British intelligence community, and of course Pakistan was a part of the British Empire. So my guess is that because of all these connections, there are probably some embarrassing and unsavory truths that simply we will never know until there is some kind of an American equivalent of the fall of the Berlin Wall and everyone gets to open up the Stasi files. But, 20 years on from 9/11, I think that the United States has never been closer than we are right now to our fall of the Berlin Wall moment. I think that this country is more divided than it has been since the 1860s over all of the matters to do with this virus and the government response. And I think that, though I think that Joe has made a misstep here, he has given the Republicans a huge opening. I think that they are not stepping up to the plate in the way that they should. They're not taking full advantage of this opportunity, which, hey, typical of your average Republican, but even DeSantis, I think, is, we'll see what he does in the next couple of days, but so far I think that he's been, I think that not his silence, but his low volume has been deafening. He hasn't been totally silent on this issue of the mandates. He said, oh, no, that's not going to happen here. But it didn't sound very definitive. And it was a question somebody else asked, and I don't know, maybe I should watch the clip again, but there's a 3-minute clip of him going around on Twitter, and it was not strong enough considering the circumstances, as far as I'm concerned. Now, I touched on this briefly yesterday, but where Biden, I think, really messed up is that he's doing this now out in the open. I think that Biden thinks that a vaccine mandate has more legitimacy if it's coming from the mouth of the president rather than from big corporate bosses, and that it would have received more pushback if this was just individual companies trying to do this on Biden's behalf behind the scenes. I told you what he could have done is just call all these big companies and put pressure on them behind the scenes, or a lot of them want to do it anyway. Most of them agree ideologically that all people should be vaccinated and all those who don't have vaccines should be fired. But because Biden didn't do that, because he decided to overtly push companies to do this, he's giving an opening to your pro-business Republicans to say, oh, we'll see, now this vaccine mandate is government policy, even though it would have been government policy either way. But because they can now paint the corporations as the victims and saying, oh, these poor corporations now have to enforce Biden's rules, now we're going to oppose you. And so you're having a lot of red state Republicans who, as I so regularly point out, are the worst Republicans in most cases. Even they are having to stand up to this to a certain extent and say, oh, we'll sue you. Now, the problem with this, with just saying, oh, we're going to sue Biden, is that by the time you get through the courts, unless they, issue an emergency injunction, which, I guess we'll have to wait and see on that. If they don't issue an emergency injunction and this goes through the full court process, works its way up to the Supreme Court, even if you win in the end, by then, everybody will have either already taken the vaccine or they will have, lost their job. The suit will be moot by then. So even if, and the court might not even rule, because they'll declare your suit to be moot. They'll say, well, this is over. Everybody's already got their vaccines. So, we're a 100% vaccinated country. So this rule is meaningless. The suit against the rule is meaningless. Case closed. And so you can't be, sure, you should sue the federal government over it, yes, but beyond that, you need to just openly defy the order. I mean, if the idea is we will obey any order given, any royal decree issued by, a tyrannical president must be obeyed unless a court rules against it, well then, a president really can just do anything, because as long as the courts are on his side. And that's not a very hard thing to do. Why would you why would you remove common sense from your own head and just completely submit yourself to the will of the courts? Then you're ruled by an oligarchy. Oh, and by the way, who appoints this oligarchy of judges? Oh, that's right. It's the president. I mean, I was hoping that after the rulings of the courts in the election context, I don't want to say too much about it because I have to be very careful. That's the only thing I've ever had a video removed from YouTube about, was talking about the 2020 election. After the way that things went with the courts then, I would hope that some Republicans, I guess Republican voters probably have woken up, but the Republican politicians certainly have not woken up to the fact that the courts are not your friends. And you're not going to win there if you think, oh my gosh, this is an outrage what Biden is doing, I'm going to sue him. You're just not a serious person. And so that's why I think that the approach that must be taken is one of outright resistance and opposition. You need to call Joe's bluff. And, we here in Florida already have a law against vaccine mandates, although not yet at the corporate level, I don't think. Or I should say not at the employer level. I think it's only for customers. You can't mandate vaccines. And there was rumblings about the state passing a law prohibiting employers from mandating vaccines as well. I think that what DeSantis should have come out and said yesterday was, we're going to push this law through. We're going to nullify this unconstitutional, edict through OSHA. It's not even a law. It's just a stroke of a pen. Biden says everyone has to get the shot. And we here are not going to go along with this. Now, there might be a good reason for DeSantis not to come out and say that. Perhaps he doesn't have the teeth or the resources to make good on that promise. Because if you were to go down that road, the state of Florida would have to do two things. One, it would have to enforce that rule or that law and punish companies that do impose vaccine mandates on their employees. And two, they would have to protect those companies from OSHA. And so if he did go down that path without careful consideration, it might end up similar to this whole rule against mask mandates in public schools. The problem with that rule that DeSantis made at the state level is that he doesn't really have enough teeth to enforce it at the district level. School districts are saying, you know what, no, we're going to impose masks on our kids anyway, and we don't care what the governor has to say about it, and all he can do is cut their salaries. That's it. And that's not a tough enough penalty to keep them from doing it. He has no real way of enforcing this. At the end of the day, if these school districts want to impose masks on their on the children, they're going to do that until they get voted out of office and replaced with people who don't want to put masks on your kids. DeSantis can't protect them from that. So maybe it's the case that after that he's made the calculation, and other governors too, although the only one I think who would even consider doing something like this at this point would be DeSantis. Maybe they really think they can't protect them from OSHA. But the thing is, if this was coordinated across, 20 or more states, the resources of OSHA are not that great. Their resources would be spread so thin that this mandate would be unenforceable. But still, that should be the focus. The focus should be on coordinating resistance, not trying to sue when you're going to lose. Or I shouldn't say you're going to lose. Maybe you'll win in court, but you're not going to lose in reality. You have to look at the way the system works and try and use it to your own advantage. That's what Biden is doing here, or I shouldn't say Biden himself, but the Biden administration. They're wagering that they're going to be able to get the results they want before they lose in court. So I know this was kind of a mixed bag of an episode, talking about 9/11 and the vaccine mandates anyway, but I will have more to say on the what I think the broader implications of this will be moving forward tomorrow, about the divisions of America that I alluded to. So I will see you all back here then.